Great. So welcome all subcommittee members to the next meeting here on September 17th, 2021. At this, oh gosh, I have all the announcements going off. It's 1 o'clock. At this time, I'd like to ask the subcommittee members to display their cameras, unmute their mics, and we'll do a brief roll call. All right. Let's see, we have in no particular order, myself, who's here. Corinne? Oh,
hi, I'm here.
great. Peter here? No, I don't see him. Sam emailed ahead of time, said he would not be able to make it. Augustine?
Here.
Judy, I saw your camera flick on there.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty with it. This is the computer that I have trouble with, so sorry.
No worries.
But I'm here.
Carol?
Here.
Oh, great. And then Andrew. And there you are.
Here.
Great. All right. So the first order of business is actually something that was emailed to me a few weeks ago. And we had kind of an internal discussion on how that would work with the subcommittee and rules and how it relates to the full LTAC committee. But Diane Anderson emailed to let us know that she, due to changes at her duties at work, she won't be able to be on the subcommittee anymore, which is unfortunate that we're losing one of our members. So that would put the subcommittee down to 9 members. We kind of talked at ELAP to see if we would want to go back with a replacement or if we'd be okay moving on with just 9 folks. Just because of the way that the subcommittee works and the full committee, I'm going to be taking over the role of the DELAPO, the designated ELAP representative on the full LTAC committee. So due to the membership numbers, I would have to remove myself from the subcommittee as well, unless we kept Diane's spot open. So I kind of want to open it up to members here just to get thoughts of if we're okay moving forward with only 9 members on our subcommittee, or if we want to add a 10th and then have me swap out with another ELAP staff that's not on the full LTAC committee as well.
I mean, personally, I think we could probably make it work with 9. Because if we have a 10th, we would end up needing to find 2 more for the subcommittee, right?
Right, because I would be swapping out and then we'd need another member if it was another LTAC member, I guess I should say.
I mean, I'm okay with doing it with 9. What do you guys think?
I think we could do it. I mean, we bring on a 10th now, we have to bring them up to speed as well. It's going to be a little more work on all of us, but I'm willing to take it on.
Do we think we're nearing the completion of our task, basically?
I kind of feel like we're getting pretty close based on looking at the document for the few hours that we've had before the meeting. I think we're getting close. I think it
Yeah, if we don't
needs
if
a
we
few
don't let
other
perfection
things.
if we don't let perfection paralysis take us over.
Right, yeah,
You
that's
know,
very true.
It's a living document. It's not going to be perfect the first time around.
Right. Yeah, it will need some edits and
Yeah.
we'll find out what those are. Hopefully as
Exactly.
it gets used.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. In that case, I think that we probably continue with what we've got, send it out, and then we're going to get more comments, and there may be a new group of people that come back in and put in their input.
I like that idea. Yeah, bring it back to LTAC, have them say, yes, this is good for draft 1, and then maybe start another subcommittee up to work on draft 2. All right. Okay, we'll leave her spot open then. So will it be down to 9? That doesn't mean that we can no longer share documents with 5 members. The maximum is now 4. That would be the quorum. So just so everyone's aware. And then with that, I'll pass it over to Augustine.
Cool. So with that in mind of sharing, I assume the way we did it with this final version was okay to send individual copies to everybody. Did anybody have issues with that approach? Was it okay to work with? Cool. That was a
Yeah.
thumbs up. That blurry thumbs up is, yeah. Good. Cool.
I think it was pretty good, actually. I couldn't see what anyone had written until today, and I was surprised and pleased, actually, seeing all of the comments that were made.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of comments. So I think maybe, Chris, what do you think? I could share the document and we can kind of go through those couple comments and if you'll agree or disagree and make edits, I guess, as needed.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So
For anyone watching on the webcast, if you want a copy of the document that was shared, document and PowerPoint, we shared the 2 separately. Just send an email to the comments inbox that should be displayed at the bottom of this webcast. And I think I made it so you can share your screen, Augustine.
okay, let me see if I can figure this out. Yep. Can you see my screen?
It's beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful for sure.
No, that's actually, it's weird. It's a fake background. I think it's a digitally made image, but it looks nice. All right, so this is the document. So what I did was I took everybody's comments, and because they were individual files and not one working document, I couldn't keep everybody's picture and name like this is. So I ended up putting the person who wrote the comment and their comment on here. Let me actually make this big so people can see it. I know. Turn on the lights so it's more comfortable, I think, for people. So yeah, what I did was I put all the comments in of everything that people commented, and the sections that were updated, I put those in as well. I kept the track changes on so that we would be able to see what was different, and then I feel like what I could do is we'll work through the document. If everything seems acceptable to people, I can finalize it, incorporate maybe some changes or whatever, and send it back out to the group since everybody's already seen it, and then we can go from there. So the first one, Andrew, I don't know if you don't want to, I guess, talk about your comments. Or I guess we go through each one and whoever wrote the comment can comment on it.
Sure, not a problem. So my comment was really that I feel like this this section was a little outside the scope of the document, although it's valuable information. My understanding was this is a sort of a method validation approach or package, and lab accreditation is separate, even though that they may be a purpose to get accreditation after validation. It's not something that is connected fully. So I thought that it's either be removed or modified to show when accreditation or how, basically the connection between the two, which is, method validation is for the approval of the program to accept that use. And then if that program does require accreditation, then you have to go through an accreditation path. So essentially separating out the processes.
I agree with that. I was getting confused by that section, wondering if I was on the wrong track as to what the document was about. I didn't make that comment, but I had the same thought.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it was Sam in one of the meetings brought up, hey, where does ELAP fit into this? And so, yeah, I think it needs to be changed. And I think maybe even put into towards the end of the document, because it is really like the last step. if the agency needs to go that route. So yeah, I'll put that on my to-do list to make it a little better.
Oh, this
There
is
isn't
it.
some-
Oh,
There's something that we missed that this is for ELAP for making accreditation. That's where I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
Or
this
for doing new accreditation.
right. That was more put in there as like this is kind of the procedural work that ELAP has. So yeah, it's definitely not the document's purpose. Yeah, it's for ELAP, but it's not really the purpose, right?
Chris, just a suggestion that a lot of this information, I think there's information in ELAP's website that contains most of this. So it's almost like you can condense it and then reference that at the end of the document.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Cool. That I think makes a lot of sense and makes it a little more usable document. So Chris, you can handle that, I guess, as your homework. So this is something that you put together. I thought it was great. A flowchart on how to use it. Make this a little bigger, but these are also in the PowerPoint slides that Chris sent out. Did you guys take a look at these flowcharts? Did you have any questions or anything that wanted to be changed? Or Chris, I don't know if you want to explain it. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty easy to figure out.
Yeah, and this was something that we had discussed at the very beginning on kind of, we want something in here that makes it the document easy to use. And as I was reading some of the very old US EPA guidance document, I'm like, this is all the stuff we've been talking about. So I did want to outline it in an easier to read, brief flowchart. I know it needs work because I know it doesn't capture everything and it kind of doesn't explain everything either. So I'm more than happy to take comments from anyone. I shared the PowerPoint files because the way it moved into Word, was a picture, which you can't edit. So folks who wanted to take a stab at rewriting and redoing things would be good. Do you want me to share? Because I have that open. Do you want me to share that and we can walk through them
Sure.
individually?
Yeah, that'd be
Make it
great.
a little easier to see for everyone than little tiny things on the screen there. All right. Oh dear. Let's move everything around. Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yep.
Great. I'm realizing I have this open as something different. So let me save it as 2. That way I don't overwrite the one that I have in the folder for folks who wanted a copy. Okay, great. So I have 3 different ones because I realized that it would be way too complicated to try to put all of them into one flowchart. So this is kind of the high level overview of where you're identifying what's the purpose of your method. Is there one that exists already that meets the purpose? And so you don't need to go through any of this, just use that one. No, we want to develop or modify an existing method. You do single laboratory testing with some ruggedness testing in there. You evaluate after you get through your single lab. Does it work? Does it meet its needs? If no, you're probably going to need to go back to the agency that you're working with and kind of say, hey, look, I don't think we can do this, or we need to change something, or the precision's too tight, or something like that, whatever it is. And same if it's federally regulated, right? Because we mentioned earlier that if it's under a Clean Water Act or Safe Drinking Water Act, US EPA needs to get involved. And so you're going to need to consult the agency to figure out where to go from there. Then you move on to multi-laboratory testing, and then you publish your final validated method. And then the next step is looking a little closer at the single lab development. So again, you're going to keep your method purpose in mind. You're going to establish your operating conditions for whatever tests you're doing, establish your calibration procedures, and you determine all of the big core pieces, the precision, accuracy, sensitivity, and what the uncertainty of the method is. Going to do the check. Does it meet your needs? No. Go back to the beginning, start all over again. You know, this process takes a long time. As any laboratory that does method development knows, especially EPA, it can take a very long time to get anything published. But if it's meeting the needs and you go through, run it through ruggedness testing, you determine if it needs to be tweaked again. After you have something that's pretty good, you run it through some holding time, some stability studies, something to show that it's still good for a certain amount of time, and then you're going to publish it as a draft method, or it's going to be done as your single lab validation, depending on what other steps you've taken in there. Then we have the multi-lab study as one of the final steps here. Again, you're going to keep the method's purpose in mind. How rigorous does this need to be? Is this federally regulated? Just another check here. Just saying, hey, go to talk to US EPA, use one of their procedures. They already exist. But if it's not, and you need to set up your own for a state or one of our state agencies, you're going to select your collaboration laboratories, give them all a copy of the SOP, have them make sure everyone can do the method. Can everyone do it? And if not, you're either going to fix the issue, get rid of them, or go back to the drawing board, right? And that could repeat in so many times as necessary. Going to go through the whole study if yes, and then evaluate the results, and it may need to go back, right? But once you're good, when you have good results, you're going to provide that formal study and publish it with that final validated method. And I think I captured what I know to be the general themes of everything, but I definitely want some feedback for this one.
I think it's cool. One question that I had on your first flow chart, if it's a federally regulated analyte, I suspect there's probably an existing method. Oh, but you have
Yeah.
the meets and needs. Okay, I got it. Never mind.
Right.
So it's probably not adequate for whatever.
Yeah, you're probably, if it's something that's federally regulated, but you need a specific detection limit, then it probably doesn't meet the needs of the agency that's
Yeah,
performing the testing. So
makes sense. Yeah, got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Would
So
it
you
be
just have a-
possible or totally overwhelming to list the questions that you would be asking, for example, with whether the method purpose has been met? You gave some examples and I thought that those were really helpful to have, but there's the problem of giving examples and then people thinking that that's an exhaustive list. And if the exhaustive list is like 20 questions, then it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I see this. I mean, we had that starting at the beginning. We made kind of a checklist, and I think we do want to have some form of checklist included with this document. So I think maybe that would be a good place to put them.
Right.
I think one of the things that we'll want to do with this flow chart is we'll want to match it with any of the headers that we have. Right. So that way it's clearer that this is what we're talking about. So like we don't have a header that's a single laboratory testing, but maybe something making, some sort of header, whatever that matches, and then have the examples of these are the things you do and this is the purpose and things like that. So yeah, but yeah, giving some examples questions I think would fit better in the flow in the checklist rather than the flow chart. I'm going to tag Peter because I see him. Does this still make sense for bioassay? I try to keep it super general.
Yeah, so for the most part, it does. I think as long as we keep, on the next slide down, the single laboratory development, the, precision, accuracy, sensitivity, uncertainty, those are broad enough terms that they can get translated out into the toxicity world. I think that, somewhere buried in the document will, I will make an effort, and everyone can comment on it, to kind of define how those fit with toxicity, so it's easily translatable to it. But the rest of this, it all applies, the operating conditions, and, calibration may be one that gets skipped per se, but, again, I think we can add general language that says if this step doesn't apply for the matrix or for, the test type, because micro is probably going to have a few exceptions on this too. It still should work okay. So yeah, I read through them and they're good enough as a generalized.
Cool. Anyone else have any comments on it? Otherwise, we're going to pass it back to.
This is Andrew. I have one comment, and it's just kind of something that it's been at the back of my mind is we have to be cognizant of the different programs have different needs for validation, I guess is the best way to put it. So I want to make sure that we're not leading towards a certain path that may not fit for programs at the water boards. For instance, we have a lot of CEC work, investigative testing that are looking at analytes that may not have methods published that that they're validated for. So going through this validation process is key. Obviously, you want to make sure that it's a high quality method, but I don't want it to be predetermined that it's has to be multi-lab validated, or it has to be go through a certain rigor to be accepted by programs. So certain programs may have different levels of rigor that that method may have to go through.
So, I think similar to, yeah, no, it makes sense. I think similar to Chris's question on the toxicity thing, I envision this as a two-way street. So, both the lab and the regulated and the body that's asking for it are going to work together. And in the end, it's like doing a site-specific study plan. You'll end up coming to some concessions where, look, you and I both agree, you as the agency that wants me to do this and me in the lab is going to do it. We're going to skip step number 6 because it may not apply for this particular thing. So I think you generalize the roadmap as best you can, and then there will have to be some, conversation and agreement of these are the rules of the game when you go into one of these for each specific instance that it does.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Also, we probably should be pretty specific about that. I feel like some state entities that maybe are less familiar with the process of validating developing methods might not be willing to make those concessions. Like, maybe number 6, they say, no, it's on my list. I got to 5, and we have to get to 6, yes or yes. We might want to be, I guess, more just clear that it's something that needs to be discussed and talked about. Like the issue of multi-lab validation. Like a good example is that imidacloprid thing that we talked about at the last full meeting. Like I can't imagine that the central regional board is going to demand that we multi-lab validate that method, because it's going to be tough to get labs to do that. And it might not be on the time scale that they need that method up and running.
Or the expense scale. I mean, doing interlab pals is not cheap, as as we're participating in the state board's, study on the Daphnia test for the toxicity provisions that are coming down. I mean, the amount of intercal that's going to go into that, that Scorp's running is going to be expensive. So yeah, no, I think, to Andrew's point, we should include some caveat language in there that says, look, these are all very generalized approaches and roadmaps, and it's as long as the agency that wants the data to be produced agrees to this pathway. And maybe one question that does need to be answered is, does ELAP need to weigh in on that agency's ability to agree to skip steps 1, 2, and 3, or 6, or whatever it may be, to be able to still consider it? And maybe that's the line between the CEC investigative trial work and actually getting an accredited method put on a scope somewhere. So I think where we can, we should just be cognizant in the document of making sure that we call those things out and show people, to your point, Augustine, there are, some folks might look at it and say, no, this is the roadmap, I have to follow it exactly as written. We should, where possible, include the language to provide flexibility so that folks can make determinations on what fits best with their program, but still ensures a high quality of final product that comes out of it.
Can we just say as applicable?
You can, as long as that's going to be enough.
There's going to be a lot of those if we're going to put those in.
Yeah.
Maybe just a brief little introductory paragraph as to the purpose and use of the flowcharts. And we go to saying things such as, you know, verify or check with or create a contract with or something like that, where we can let people know that depending upon the end purpose of the method or something like that, there may be steps that are not followed, or the expense of doing a multi-laboratory testing may outweigh the need to complete that step. You know, just some sort of paragraph that helps them understand the general purpose of these flow charts to help them, but they in no way are a hard, fast path that needs to be followed.
Yeah, and I think definitely multi-lab study as applicable or as needed definitely would come out of here. And then maybe over here, we instead of draft method, we'd say single lab method or something like that. Something that's clear of, and circle back into the general method.
Yeah.
Your general flow
You
chart.
can even just put it as, I mean, what you really need is you need a standard operating procedure, right? And you need,
Right.
you know, what the QC limits are. So maybe not a full-blown method, but something short of that.
Yeah.
And you might not want to say final validated method, because there may be additional steps needed by Clean Water Act or SW 846 to make it what they consider a validated method. So I may, you know, validated method I like. I don't necessarily like the final, because there still may be a few more hoops that have to be jumped through if they're going the step of getting it added to a set of methods, published methods or something like that.
Because promulgated becomes
Mhm.
Yeah, no.
thing.
Certainly don't want to use that word.
No, we're not using that one.
Yeah.
We're trying not to use ATP either, but it's just such a nice term. It's hard to come up with anything better.
Yeah, we can describe it as validated per this document or something, or to the whatever outlined in this document, and leave it at that, and have anybody else that has more restrictive or prescriptive validation criteria
Okay.
do it that way.
You can even do, yeah, you could even do published / validated, because that, you know, I mean, at least there, once you get a paper out or something that's publicly available, that gives you even a little more leeway past a fully final validated method.
All right, I have some homework to do for this one too. With that, I'll stop sharing here and we'll pass it back.
Okay. Cool. Yes, I think that those will be very helpful. Next section that was changed was the definition section. So I should have included this. Sorry. We'll just go here. So this is the sections that Carol cleaned up. I think this looks great. I don't know if you want to go through these. I didn't have any issues with them.
You want to zoom in a little bit too.
Oh, sorry.
So basically I was asked to look and see what we had defined that potentially T&I already had defined. So I did have a copy of the T&I standard. So I identified their definition versus ours. And then I was confused on the specificity because it didn't sound like it was a definition. it's more of almost like a to-do or a requirement. So I thought maybe we might want to look at the definition of specificity a little closer.
And I think we'll also have the checklist that Chris mentioned. That I think this definition list kind of felt like I think you're right. It felt like a checklist / list of definitions. So we would have both. And once the whole document comes together, we can put that checklist together and then have something that actually feels like a checklist. So if specificity shouldn't be there, we can probably just take it out.
Well, no, because I know as I was reading different sections, especially when, you know, I did have the time and was trying to look at the precision and accuracy part. And even in the ruggedness, you know, there was a need for specificity that a lot of people confuse with well, I guess it's not so much specificity as selectivity. So I wasn't sure if we, you know, which phrase we want to, or which word we wanted to use, because everything that I saw associated with specificity, I also saw associated with the selectivity. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding muffled, but I'm in the office and we're required to wear masks in the office if I don't have a office where I could close the door. So I apologize for that. But I almost think that our definitions may come out better when we get to the end of the document, because as we go through, because I know I defined ruggedness in my ruggedness section, so it may not necessarily need to be in a definitions, or maybe we need to take that out and put it in the definitions. But it may be that we should revisit this definition section once we have the rest of the document written. And then if there's things that we feel need to be defined, or where we want to move definitions into a definition section, my personal preference is have the definition in the section you're talking about, because it drives me nuts going back and forth pages to try and figure out what I'm supposed to be thinking about. But that's neither here nor there. So that's basically what I did.
Yeah, I think that if it's a section in this document, probably don't need to have this definition here. I agree. It maybe is a way to lead into that section. If we have a section on sensitivity, you know, we can say that sensitivity is the capability of a method or instrument to discriminate, blah, 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 blah. And kind of at the end, put together the definitions as needed. Because there's no sense in repeating that. Like, I think if somebody's going to be looking at this, they're going to get to the section on sensitivity and it should be there, instead of having to get a primer on all these things up front and then start reading it. And I think you're right, Carol. It might make it a little more usable of a document if we just list the definitions at the end once we figure out what needs to be defined.
I mean, if you want
to, go ahead.
If you want to put something in this section, and you know, we're going to use a lot of acronyms, especially when you're talking about a lot of governmental names and things like that. I mean, if we want to set this up as an acronyms list, so that we can go right into using the acronyms from the beginning, that was another thought that another use I thought of for this section in particular, so that we know that we have all our acronyms named out someplace and in a single place where they can find it, instead of having to find the first place it was used to see, you know, what it means. So that was just another thought that I had about this section.
I agree. I think this kind of reads almost more like a table of contents than a definitions. And you know, I agree. We don't. This shouldn't be where we start. It should be where we end on this. You know, maybe try and work it into the sections. Don't make it a table of contents. Don't try and define sections that become their own definitions.
This is Judy. I just want to add something real quick on this. The selectivity, specificity, and the other things. I think part of the reason why this is included to start with is because when you're looking at a method or looking at determining what method is necessary to validate something, it's keeping the things in mind that if it's a new analyte, selectivity being something that's more or less the ability to determine one thing from another, and specificity being more on the accuracy side of whatever you've identified. Those are both important things if you're talking about something that's undetermined or unknown from the standpoint of method validation. I also agree that this does need to go to the end of the document as well as with the acronyms, because I think those are important. The acronyms in this business are pretty extensive. We have a lot of different ways of saying the same things, especially with quality control. So I do think that's a good idea, but I think the definitions, I think how the ones that are in here are important. And I don't know that we don't need some additional ones at some point. And maybe when we get to the end of this, we might want to add more to it. That's just my thoughts.
Well, I do know that part of the request that I had in my action item was we didn't want to necessarily, since a lot of our quality control was going to be pointing back to T&I, we didn't necessarily want to put in definitions contrary to T&I, and theoretically maybe refer them to T&I for those definitions, because we don't want a copyright issue. And that's kind of where I took my action item, was from that discussion that we had associated with that. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind with this, and how are we going to address T&I associated with our document. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks. So I was just, Carol, when you were talking, you were saying that you defined like ruggedness in the section when you were working on it. And if we're going to eventually have a checklist that has these terms up front, like do you have a measure of sensitivity or accuracy for your validation? We could potentially just hyperlink from that checklist to that section in the document, and then have the definition right there. So it kind of provides a little more utility to the document if it's like not a sophisticated user or somebody that doesn't understand what those terms apply to.
Yeah, I like that. I think that'd be easy way to do it. And I think it would be better to have them in the sections. If you guys think we could also add at the end as just in case. I was thinking like Pam mentioned, if we have a table of contents, we can even put the definition in the table of contents. But I like Andrew's idea of the checklist with the hyperlink. I think it'd be easy and makes it more useful for folks. Sorry, go ahead, Corey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of echo what Judy was saying, or someone was talking about, a user that maybe isn't all that sophisticated. And that's something that I was thinking about looking at the definitions, is the idea that this is going to be someone who is trying to develop a method is looking at, or is it something that you're hoping someone who's just learning about method development and someone like myself and thinking about what definitions and acronyms might need to be spelled out for that person, and if examples would be helpful too. And yeah, I agree for that reason that this is probably the last thing that should be done in the document, because we aren't going to know until it's all finalized what it would be most helpful to have.
In response to that, Corey, I agree with you, because the thing that we have to remember is that the purpose of developing this is not only for someone who is trying to develop a method, or the end user regulators who are going to be looking at these developed methods and saying, will it meet my needs? Does it have all the things that, you know, it should have in it? So we will have people looking at that, at this document, who don't know these, who don't really have a clue of what they mean, who I don't know. I mean, if they're if they're government people, they're used to having to go back to some sort of glossary. But you know, do we want to make it easier for them by putting definitions within the sections, as well as having this end glossary, so they can go, oh, I remember there was that one word, and they could go look, oh yeah, that's the one. You know, that's the one I was thinking of. So we just need to kind of think outside the box of, you know, all of us have, or a lot of us have the, you know, the laboratory background, and our focus is on, this is for somebody who's going to be developing the method. But it's not, it's also going to be for people who are trying to review a developed method and determine whether it's robust enough to meet the needs that they have for their project.
So I'm just going to jump in and reiterate kind of what I'm hearing the group, and kind of turn them into action items, because I like giving people homework assignments. I think what we want to do is we want to move this section to the end, and more of the document is done. But it sounds like we also really want a table of contents. And we want it to include all of the bits that we've already written, and hopefully be in a logical order. So that's kind of the two things that I see coming out of it. And then once we have all of that set up, then maybe the definitions would become definitions and acronyms. And I'm hearing folks say that linking some definitions just to the sections itself might be good, but that might be taken care of if we have a table of contents. So how does that sound for action items?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. We'll give the document a little more shape and get it going. I could volunteer for the table of contents and put that together as the document babysitter. I'm happy to do that.
As you're the document babysitter, can you just move this section into the back?
Sure, that
And
too.
then whoever is assigned to it can go ahead and start working on it in the place where it's gonna be located.
That works. And should I include these definitions in the relevant sections as a first sentence up there?
Well, that's my question for the group, because like I say, there was a big concern about copyright infringement on TNI. And do we want to modify our definitions so that we're not copywriting TNI, or do we want to just refer them to TNI for the definitions?
So I can jump in here because we have some news that TNI has graciously offered to host a read-only copy on their website that's available for anyone in California that wants to read it. So I think for some TNI sections, we maybe want to say, just point straight back to TNI and say, here's TNI, and then we can link the link to the hosted version that anyone can read. For some of them. For others, I think I like our definitions a little better, just because, you know, we don't need to use exactly how it's written, because like for accuracy, right? For example, ours is pretty short and TNI's is very verbose, and kind of, you know, maybe we'll take some bits from it and expand on ours a little bit, but you know, it's one of those that, like, just as an example, having something shorter to read that's kind of more broadly applicable might be a little easier on some users. So,
And it's again looking at, we're hitting laboratory and non-laboratory people.
right, yeah. Judy, you got your hand up?
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe with these with anything that belongs to in the TNI document, I don't see where it would be an issue if we did want to use it. I mean, just simply because I think it would be easy to get permission as long as we referenced it correctly. Anything that we want to reference, to be honest. I mean, I'm on the board of directors for TNI and have been on there for quite some time, and there's been permissions given over the years that makes it so that it's easy to do those things. So however we want to do it, we find it that it's important to the document, I don't think it'll be a problem. So you know, and by the same token, as I already mentioned, we can certainly, you know, use our own definition if we like. But if we feel it's important to reference TNI, I feel like we'll be able to do that.
Peter, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I was peeking at my other screen because it came to mind that, you know, I mean, there are other documents out there that kind of have a structure for this. I wonder if you just bury an appendix at the back that covers, you know, I mean, you can't define absolutely every single thing in there for every person that may need a definition for something, but I bet you could pick the top 20% of the most important terms and have it be 2-ish or 3-ish pages of references, and then do the same thing for the acronyms, that you just bury it in an appendix and have a chunk of acronyms that are there, because it is easier than, you know, trying to write the whole thing out over and over and over again. And what I was looking at was an NPDES permit, because those have a bunch of nomenclature in them that are not always super familiar to everybody, and they just have a whole, you know, the first attachment in the back after the body of the permit is full of definitions and full of acronyms for the user to be able to read the document. So maybe in the end, it takes the form of an appendix to be able to at least cover the really important ones that people are going to need some context and definition for. And if, you know, Judy says TNI is not going to have a problem with it, then it should be as easy as just copy and pasting a lot of that stuff in there.
Cool. I like it. I think we'll move on to the next area. I think we've talked about it for a bit now. Definition.
Yeah, so from my end, I'll put these in the back and I'll put together the table of contents that kind of mimics this / what we have in the sections. So the section on measurement certainty, I know was cool. Pam, I don't know if you wanted to talk about it, what you came up with on this.
I came up with some of this. Some of it was from TNI, and some of it was from the A2LA documents that Carol sent me. I was trying not to make it prescriptive, trying to make it more definitive with giving like some best practices. So I'm not sure that I got all of that in there. So basically we started out just kind of defining basically what the measurement uncertainty is, where they're coming in from the field, the prep, the lab phases. And then I added in there that it's important to determine how the measurement or the uncertainty relates to the data quality objectives. And we want to make sure that we get the data quality objectives so that we can compare the measurement uncertainty to that. Measurement uncertainty is not applicable to qualitative identification methods. That would probably apply to like the toxicity methods. Although I think that you have some uncertainty with that, even with your statistics. Talked about it being, in some cases, it may be the LCS. How to establish a new measurement uncertainty based on the control limits and starting with 20 results to calculate a measurement uncertainty. And that those should be the in control results. And Carol and I had an exchange. I went back and forth on that one. because when you do LCS charts on an ongoing method, you would include your failures so that you look at the overall limit. But on a new method, you may have 100 spikes that don't get you anywhere. Those should not be controlled. You should only include the ones that are basically representative of your final method product. And then, reporting measurement uncertainty, having it on hand is one thing, but reporting it, that will be based on the stakeholders' needs. So it's about all on that section. Any comments?
I think it was cool. I like that it's a little bit more vague. I think I don't know if Andrew mentioned it or somebody else, but putting in very prescriptive things makes it tough. Making it general, say this is what you should be doing. I thought was good. I thought it was appropriate for the document.
Okay, thank you.
And in the various references that we were using, we were able to find an ASTM method that actually talks about, or gives a more prescriptive process for it. That's kind of why we added the reference there. So if somebody really wanted to go see what a process would be, there's a reference that they could use.
Okay, I think this is great. I have no problems with it. I would say this is pretty close to being done. So we can continue on down.
I like it too. I just want to make sure it makes sense to folks that aren't so laboratory inclined. So I think this will be one of those that if we could get anyone who's watching on the webcast that wants to provide, hey, I don't get this. Like, what does this mean? What does this part mean? What does that part mean? Because we do want to address it as much as we can. But I think, that's part of the hurdle of working on a subcommittee like this is we all kind of know what it is and know what it means. So we do want some of that unbiased input from anyone who's watching the webcast.
Would we be able to solicit advice or input from somebody at one of the water boards or somebody else who's not so laboratory inclined?
Yeah, I might be able to connect with some folks, and Andrew might be able to pull some other people in as well, who are less lab focused. Give it to him and say, hey, what do you think of this? That might be a good idea. I might be able to do that before the next meeting. We'll see though.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Andrew. I would say that might be something we want to do when we get closer to a final product, is have them read it over and give us feedback on it. One thing that I was thinking about with this section specifically is it's right up front. It's like the first thing that's discussed. And I'm not sure if that's, I know we're probably gonna have to, Tetris this together a little bit, move sections around, but as we're going through this, maybe, I don't know if there's a order of operation or like a logical flow of the document that we can stick with as far as presenting some of this information.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I took a stab at precision, and I was thinking measurement uncertainty would be much better if it was closer towards the precision section.
Yeah, I think the order could definitely be cleaned up so it makes sense as a one complete document. Right now it's kind of just in there haphazardly so we can get the sections in, and then once we get closer and get the table of contents, actually maybe I'll take a stab at doing that before I make the table of contents and putting it in an order that makes a little bit more sense, at least to me, and then see what you guys think. Carol, go ahead. You get your hand up.
I do believe at one point we do talk about control charting. And since this is very closely related to control charting, and is related to LCSs, maybe definitely located after precision and accuracy discussions. And if we are having a control charting section, that it kind of be near that as well. for those who are not laboratory savvy, and it was something I didn't think of when Pam asked me to review it, is we could put in a common example. Because ultimately what this is that plus and minus, plus minus amount that you see in certain measurements that you get, whether it be on your standards, but I'm sure we could find something in everyday life that people would recognize that's not laboratory related, to say that, it's related to this error associated with a measurement. For example, when you look at your coffee grounds and they say that they're this size plus or minus this amount or something, that plus or minus is what's considered a measurement uncertainty. And then that would help regulators kind of understand this concept maybe in a real world, I can't talk, a real world sense.
And I'm fine with moving it around. I wasn't tied to it. In my mind, I was thinking of it that it is something that kind of has to happen at the front end. If a regulator is asking for a method, they should be telling the labs or having in their mind what is going to be an acceptable measurement uncertainty. And then we kind of develop our methods to meet that needs. I mean, otherwise we're letting the cart drive the horse here. If we just say, regulators, you have to live with the measurement uncertainty we get, or do we continue to process and prove until we hit the data quality objectives that you need? So, I mean, I think there's both ways of looking at it, and I'm fine with it moving, but that was why I was thinking it needed to be up front so that we set what are the goals that you're shooting for when you're doing the method development.
Yeah, I think you're right, Pam. It needs to be up front. I think the first two that we had discussed were accuracy and precision. So very broad, kind of big terms. And then number 3 is definitely uncertainty.
I agree. Wait, I can move that around. Judy, go ahead.
You're on mute.
I know. That's all that. Okay, so one of the questions that I have is, do we want to go down the path of even talking about control charting? And the reason why I ask that is because there's acceptance criteria and recovery criteria, the way you calculate control limits and so on and so forth for just general acceptance criteria. But then when you go into charting, now you're talking about trends and things such as that. And to validate a method, I don't know that that's necessary. And I think it will add something that I don't know that we want to go down that path. That's just my thoughts, because in order for something to be validated, you don't have to control chart it. You just have to calculate limits.
Right. And I would agree with that. I don't think that the control charts have to be done. Control charts are a way of setting measurement uncertainty, but they're not the only way.
It's just a thought. I just don't want to add complexity to a document that's not supposed to be super deep. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Penny.
so
Sorry.
I was kind of agree with Judy in the sense that I think it's something that should be, is again, as we continue to just sort of give options, this is one way to do it. You don't get into the mechanics of how to do it necessarily, because I mean, when it comes to, again, speaking selfishly for the toxicity stuff, control charting organism responses is a huge part of validating a method. You have to be able to show, appreciable sensitivity and consistent results in there. So, I mean, we don't have spikes and blanks and that kind of stuff as much. So the control charts are incredibly important. You wouldn't want to use a test species that you couldn't produce a consistent response in. So again, I don't think you get into the weeds on it, but I think you put it in there as one way of adding to the accuracy and the precision. And then again, there's plenty of other documents that are available to describe the different ways that you can do the data trends and the analysis and the control charting. But you insert it as a reference and a mention, as opposed to here's a list of exactly how to do it and what to look at.
Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, so yeah, just kind of add to that, and we were talking about something a few minutes ago about navigating this document and putting a table of contents in. And my hope is that we're still going to have a checklist that goes with this, because that the checklist that was originally with the document had kind of walked you through the thought process. And if you'll just humor me for a second, we'll go back to our mission statement, second paragraph of this document. And it says the purpose of this document is to provide guidelines that establish a framework for method validation and evaluation of suitability that can be applied to any analytical method, technology, analyte, or matrix. It will also serve as a guidance for stakeholders to determine method suitability. So to kind of piggyback off of what Peter just said, we do want to have a good, credible choice to establish precision or accuracy or whatever, and use it simply as an example, as one way to do it. So I definitely want to support that comment, but also continue to keep this simple enough that it doesn't read in such a way that the reader feels like they've got to make a lot of choices. And that's what we don't want to do. So we want to still try to keep this relatively simple. At some point, when a method moves past validation, you will move into other things that you will have to do and establish and so on and so forth to monitor the method, to make sure that you're running it correctly, just the day-to-day running of the method. But to get to the point of validation, there's these core things that have to happen. And that's what this document is supposed to help us get to. So just kind of wanted to bring that up, because I don't want to see us get hung up on too many details on how to get this done. Oh, sorry. I just raised my hand again. I didn't mean to.
That's good. I like bringing us back to the core. I'm just going to do a quick time check. It's 2:00. We did say this would go until 3. We can stretch that a little bit if folks are able to, but just keep that in mind, everyone.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's good to go back and remember what the purpose is, so we don't get lost in the weeds. So yeah, I think that stuff's good. We can move those things around and get it kind of cleaned up. I could try my hand at putting an example in to this, or I'll try to do something. That'll be one of my action items, and see what you guys think. So moving to the next section. This is the section that Sam kind of worked on, or he gave some comments on. He's not here, so I think we can ask him about the specifics on micro things at the next time. And Pam made some comments. I think these are totally make sense. I don't know if Pam, you wanted to bring up what you were asking about the blanks and the spikes and stuff.
The way it was written, I just kind of got myself all confused here before I realized I'm pretty sure that second section was worded wrong, because I wasn't quite sure what the intent was really of this section. It was foreign. And generally in TNI, it's labeled in terms of negative controls and positive controls. The first part, I think, with the false negatives might be the positive controls. I wasn't sure. But the percentage of the false positives, that's looking for negative controls, right? So I couldn't understand why it was saying that it was spiked. It should be, if we're looking for a false positive, we should be looking at a blank that gives us a detect, right? And so it should be non-spiked samples, or was I completely off here in the way I was looking at this?
I think that makes sense. I think I took this from what Judy put together. Judy, you remember where this came from?
I think this might have been from Sam.
Oh, was this
actually.
a whole thing from Sam? Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
'cause-
I think you're right, Pam. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, maybe it was
No.
just a cut and paste error.
Yeah. Because you're right, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. But I think what the false positives is, you're spiking it with a different bacteria.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In that case, it needs to be clarified that it's not a chemistry. I mean, I know that we're trying to bridge both sides of things, but yeah,
I just muted myself. I think that's one of Sam's comments here is, did we decide on whether qualitative also refers to presence absence tests? And so I think this one needs to get moved way down closer to the end in terms of sectioning. And then I think we'll table this one for folks who want to add more comments to it, because I think you're right. I think it does need some more work and some more thought on what does it mean.
Yeah,
I just wonder if here's a place where we're just trying to get too specific, right? You know, I mean, do we just boil this down into a general discussion of positive and negative controls and their presence and their uses and how that feeds in to the data? Because again, you know, I mean, if you do it at that level, you can span it across all the different practices of micro and tox and chem, because all of those have positive and negative controls, but how they define them, do them, you know, 20 to 50, 10%, like that's going to be a can of worms that I don't think you want to get into at this level.
right. And TNI does a good general overview of positive and negative controls. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily control like the false positives do the non-target interferences, and that may be perfectly applicable to micro type work. But otherwise, maybe we can kind of generalize back to the TNI. Yeah, because I mean, it is very specific here as to, you know,
Well,
10%,
and you
50%.
yeah, and you highlighted the exact thing that we're trying to avoid, right? You read this as a chemist. The guy that wrote it was a micro guy, and you know, we ended up with a misunderstanding on it. So, you know, I mean, again, I think when we get into these sections, you know, we want to just keep forcing ourselves to get up in the clouds and say, looking at a 30,000 foot view, how can we take what we really want to get out of this, which is the value of positive and negative controls, and developing a method and apply it in this.
Right. And if we have to be specific to toxicity or micro or chemistry, we need to be clear.
Tuck it in the back.
And I feel like we might want to be careful about putting in criteria, period, like in general for anything, because then somebody like Peter mentioned, a micro guy could put in, you know, it's got to be 10%, but maybe a toxicity is like you can't have that, or chemistry is not possible. Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean,
try to get rid of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The MDL is defined as 50%, 50% positive, negative in chemistry. Yeah. Yeah. Make it more general. We need to
that where applicable, or as it applies to the matrix method, blah blah blah.
Cool. That makes sense.
Want to volunteer to take a crack at this section for next time? Just so we're not stepping on each other's toes. If nobody volunteers, I'll leave it open and we'll put it on the action item. All right, hearing none right now, I'll leave it open.
So
on that section, the screening qualitative, I think part of what was confusion for me was just even what the intent of that section was. And that may be a big thing of just starting over and then jumping into, you know, the false positives, the false negatives, those type of things. But that's part of the reason why I don't want to volunteer, is I'm not sure what the purpose of that section is.
Got it. I'll add that to the note.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if memory serves me, the purpose of it was very, you know, the high level purpose of it was, you know, is there an opening or a place in which, you know, your care about the overall precision of the method is not as high because, you know, whether it's a CEC or something that's harder to quantify for the purposes of doing rapid assessment, I just want, is it here or is it not here, as opposed to it's here at 20 ppt or 20 ppm or whatever it is. So I don't know that it needs to have a whole section dedicated to it at the beginning. I almost feel like the discussion underneath this should be less specific to false, or to, you know, negative and positive controls, or false positives and false negatives, but it should be more written around if the purpose of what you're asking for as the regulatory agency is rapid screening, presence and absence, see section X, or here are the general rules, or the following things may not apply out of the more rigorous method development sections. But and anybody on here can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was what the overall ask was in the end. Was one of the stakeholders said, hey, there are certain times where I don't particularly care how much of it is there. I just want to know if it's there or not. And I think because there is, for micro, there's a component of, whether you do a plate count or a simple presence absence test. I think that's how Sam ended up volunteering to take it up.
And that kind of becomes a data quality objective. Is it what's the goal of the method?
Exactly. So I don't necessarily know that the section needs to be retooled as much as, maybe it needs to be redefined and put somewhere else, and then the components within it, positive controls, negative controls, false positives, false negatives, needs to get defined or outlined in a separate section. Because again, false positive in chemistry, in toxicity, it's less about false positives and it's more statistical analysis leading to false positives or false negatives of the data at the end. So, I think that simple statements on a process should be included that addresses the ability to control for false positive and false negative results as part of your method development scheme, as opposed to getting into the weeds of how exactly to do that.
And I think one of Sam's checklists had quite a few references that we could include for here's examples of how to do it. So, okay, I'll make some notes for the action item on kind of what we wanted to do with this section, like I've done with the past meetings, and get that out to all of you to see who wants to volunteer.
Sounds good. Thank you. So the next section is the precision section that Chris, you worked on.
Yeah, I did my best of kind of, and we've discussed on some of the other topics of this is kind of how we wanted to do it. Have like a little opening paragraph of kind of what does precision mean, and then give examples of ways to do it. So I gave background on precision. I said typically this is how you would use it. You use a fortified reagent water for chemistry, right? Or micro is a little different. And then kind of here are two examples or ways to determine precision: relative standard deviation, relative standard error. And then I try to pull in some micro stuff with the limited background that I have, which is the variable counting, right? If you have analysts counting multiple different plates, you have a specific criteria for that, and the standard methods has a way to do that. So I tried to include that as well. So this is attempt one, and I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me, and I like that we talked about earlier about having, these are a couple ways on how you can do this, some examples, and let people figure it out. That works out.
One item on ordering the system, to me, it always makes sense to do accuracy before we do precision.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably first you should get it accurate and then precise.
You're
Carol.
going to do it with the same set.
Yeah. Carol, go ahead.
I have a little bit of a problem with the sentence. Laboratory methods should include a corrective action if the evaluated precision is not within expected limits. That's not necessarily part of a method. That's part of a quality system. So I don't know if we want to start dictating that. Maybe instead of making that comment, we say, some sort of correction should be performed, and maybe refer them to T&I or something like that to address it. That's just my thoughts. Nowhere else have we sat and turned around and said, if this doesn't work, you need to do something about it. But here we are. And so I'm wondering if we're overstepping maybe our bounds on that.
I added that more in as that's common in a lot of the EPA methods. If this doesn't work, you recalibrate. If this doesn't work, you know.
Yeah, well, they like to use corrective action incorrectly.
Yeah.
So include maybe corrections. I could go with that, but corrective action to me relates more to a full corrective action form.
Yeah, I think we can work on this. I think it's a pretty good take, but we can definitely revise it to make it a little more cleaned up for this document. And I think we have a couple. So yeah, we do have a section on RSC, and I thought we had a section on RSC as well. So I could move both of those in there. And if we don't have one, I could put together both of these sections if they're missing.
Yeah. And I think what we have for RSD and RSE, I think are a little too detailed. I think
Yeah.
really what we want to do is we want to say this is their purpose.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then say, go see here to how to do it. I mean, RSD is a little easier because it's like one formula. And you don't have to do a whole lot of stuff, but RSC is a little more complicated. So
in that case, would it be better just to have a little description? This is what it is. This is how you use it. Go figure it out, and just leave it at that, right?
yeah, here's a reference.
Okay, cool. I could do that. I'll volunteer for that. Those
Okay.
two. Judy? Oh, you're still muted.
I'm so bad about that. Just to add to that on the RSD and RSE. So RSD, I agree with what you're saying there. That's in most of the organic methods. You don't see it so much in other methods, but the RSD is almost included in almost all the organic methods. So if you're using a method, start with that information's there. RSE was introduced in the 2016 standard. So you might be able to just reference, we might be able to just reference the TNI standard there because it's now a requirement under that standard. Relative error and relative standard error both in there in module 4. So that would be a good reference for that as well. The only thing that we're not ever really allowed to reprint, reproduce, or whatever from the TNI standard is the actual ISO language. But referencing them and some light use of their language, I think is perfectly fine. So I have no problem with seeing us reference off if we need to on some of the stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I think I do that. I just give a little description based on how it's described in TNI and then reference module 4.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, it's one of those things that when we had the TNI meeting, the NEMIC meeting or whatnot in Seattle this past year, this was one of the topics of concern because the RSC is kind of a new concept to the labs. The idea is to replace correlation coefficient. So instead of just everybody looking for a 0.99 or better, you've got something that gives you a little bit more tangible understanding of how well your calibration curves are really looking. And that's what RSE and RE are designed to do, right? So it's been a struggle from a concept perspective for the laboratories because many of the laboratories had not seen this before. So it's one of those things that everybody, a lot of people are still learning on. So there is a lot of good documents out there, and I think there's an actual guidance document that explains this pretty well on TNI's website.
Cool.
And
We would reference that.
Okay, perfect.
So we had a bunch of other
Yeah, and all of this stuff I think is just too much in the weeds.
too much, yeah.
I
And we're not
agree.
going to tell people how to do stuff, so yeah.
Yeah, this whole section, I started editing it and then it's like, it probably just all needs to go away.
Yeah, I agree. So I think we'll just cut all this stuff out. and leave this
Right.
short section with some descriptions and references. Should be good. Cool. So accuracy, I mean, I don't know if we want to have something more prescriptive or less prescriptive rather.
The 1/3, the MRL, that's a drinking water thing, I believe. So that might be too prescriptive for non-drinking water samples. So, yeah, I thought some of this was, this is DQOs. This document should not be setting data quality objectives. If nothing else, this is an example of data quality objectives that could be set by a regulator, but we shouldn't in this document.
Yeah, I think this table is pulled directly from one of the ATP documents.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Okay,
probably the drinking water.
got it. I think these are good pieces to have. And I think maybe we need to go kind of like what I did with the precision section is say, here's examples of ways of determining accuracy. You know, using a surrogate, using an internal standard, using blanks, I guess, sort of. But I think that this is a good table to start from, but yeah, it's too prescriptive. It's too specific. I saw Judy's hand go up first and then Peter.
Yep. So I think the purpose of putting this out there was solely for a place to start. And it was more or less, you know, a comparative thing. This was not, I don't think it was put in here because it was designed to tell anybody how, you know, how their method needs to, or their validation needs to perform as much as it is, you know, this is a starting point. It's kind of like 70 to 130 and SW 846, you know, that tells you that, you know, this is what you shoot for, but when you get enough points, you do your own limits and blah, blah, blah. You know, so the 1/3 MRL, that is actual drinking water terminology. However, if you look in, and I'm going to get this right, it's been a long time since I've dealt directly with methods, 200.7, 0.8, and 0.9, 200.2, which is the actual prep method for some of those methods. The blank criteria is even more stringent than 1/3 the MRL, because I think it's 2.2 times the detection limit is where your method blank cannot be below. So when you say 2.2 times your method detection limit, that's pretty tight. So and I don't know that that anybody hits that on a very regular basis. That's the reason why I think we've changed the MDL criteria to do blank analysis so that we can kind of set that degree of separation between instrument noise and actual hits on an instrument. So, but the method blank criteria, however strict this may be, if any of this really just allows a person to focus on what their recoveries are and say, is this normal? So surrogate recovery plus minus 30% on an organic method, that's 70 to 130. Same thing on precision and duplicate, plus or minus 30. So you know, these are reasonable criteria to look at. It doesn't mean that you have to hit them, but it's certainly reasonable and gives you a comparative. So I would notate it properly, probably, and leave it in there just as comparisons. That's just my thoughts.
Peter, go ahead. Thanks, Judy, for that. Peter, go ahead.
I was gonna just, you know, I mean, I think to Chris's point, I wonder if in this section you just have a couple paragraphs that narrate the importance of accuracy and a couple of different ways to measure, achieve, look at, and then you take stuff like this in these examples and you either tuck them in the chemistry specific portion of it, or you leave it sort of behind. Because I think that, you know, since we're still in the opening 9 pages of this thing, you know, really, I think we want to work to keep these opening sections as generalized as possible, and then start tucking the details down in appendices and flowcharts and back sections on it. So, I mean, Judy ran off more numbers than I was able to understand. So, you know, I mean, in that level of it, it'll make perfectly good sense to someone who's a VP at a multinational chemistry firm in quality assurance. But, you know, I mean, for a regulator that's working to get this online, I think, you know, as we ease people into the document, you know, we want to try to keep it as general as we can, and then let the real scholars and the ones that want to hammer it, you know, have access to that more detailed material in later sections of it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a good way to organize it. Andrew?
Hi, sorry, I got a crazy barking dog in the background, so I apologize if she goes off. So I kind of wanted to just voice my support for what Judy says. I think that this, although we don't want to frame it that it's an absolute have to hit these, it might be a good reference for some of the programs that may not have established MQOs or may not know where to start. So this is a good framework for those. And so I would say that having it in here as more framed as guidance or examples of what these limits can be would be my preference.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I'm up for putting it as an appendix somewhere in the back. Here are some examples. It'd be good. Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with that. So depending on how you want the document to read, I can see it go either way. I agree with what Peter says. You don't want to slam people up front with a whole bunch of technical information, but you do want the information in there so that you can reference it. Because I'll be honest with you, one of my biggest criticisms when they changed the section in module 4 of the T&I standard and added RSE and RE was they did not put any kind of criteria in there for it. So it just kind of got left open-ended. So the comparison, kind of the standard kind of became 20% because that's kind of what's normal. But the industry didn't have to gravitate that direction, but they kind of gravitated that way just simply because of precision numbers and what was acceptable there. So I'll just say that the lack of having something to shoot for kind of leaves the door open to potentially bad decisions on what's okay. And so that's I'm that person that's always going to have heartburn if there's not a barrier of some sort set in place. So anyway, but setting it towards the back, I think it's good.
Yeah, no, I for sure think you should. And I'm kind of the same way of, give me an example so I at least know what ballpark I'm supposed to be swinging in. I think that, just for the opening portions of the document, we should probably sort of move from generalization to specificity, sort of in the pyramid model, and provide the bulk of the examples, towards the back, so that as we go on the choose your adventure journey, people have it. But for 100% for sure, you should absolutely be including things like this in the appendices so that people have a frame of reference and at least a starting place if they have absolutely no idea where to go from. So no, I wouldn't say take it out. I would just say, again, the ordering of this is going to be a work in progress. So as a non-chemist, I can kind of understand this, but when I think accuracy, I think it'd be helpful to provide people with a broader definition first.
Cool.
Yeah, can't figure out where my raise hand button is. That's all right. Everyone finished anyway. So I think this is kind of one of those in the checklist might be good, where we can say accuracy and then kind of say, here's things that you use to determine accuracy, right? You have surrogates, you have internal standards. And then in the checklist, we'll have, accuracy as a subheading, and then say, method blanks, precision, method blanks, surrogates, internal standards, if you're doing something else funny, and then kind of give our suggested criteria maybe, or recommended criteria, plus or minus 30%, internal standards plus or minus 50%, or greater than 50%, or whatever it is, rather than having a big table, or just have a big table and then have the checklist and say, here's the big table and here's a blank checklist. You fill in your values and what you used, right? So that way it's a kind of an easy stepwise process for a method developer or a regulator to say, here's the checklist. Let me go through all of these things and count all of the pieces, put NA, put yes, if yes, put in specific limits, that kind of thing. Thoughts?
I like the idea of the checklist, the blank checklist, and putting your limits and use this as a reference. I think it's good. It makes it easy for people. I think that we have to make the document easy for people to use, easy to use, and easy for regulators to understand. So if you have at the end product, if the lab develops a method and they have this template of a checklist that they send to the regulator with a data package or whatever it is, then it makes it way easier for everybody. But that's going to be something we have to put together at the end. It's probably the last thing to go.
Yeah. Maybe before definitions.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to volunteer for taking on accuracy to rewrite that section?
I'll give it a shot.
All right.
Just a question, are we including bias in there as well? We lumping it together like it kind of is?
That would
Well-
be the precision.
Well,
So
not wholly.
Bias is usually lumped in with accuracy.
Accuracy.
It could be very accurate. Have an extreme bias, you're not going to get close to the answer. So it kind of lumps together, at least all the various different things that I read up, always kind of lumps those two together. And especially if you look at this chart, there's a method blank criteria there. So obviously they're trying to talk about some bias. Let me give it a shot and see what I can do.
Cool. Thank you, Carol. So the RST section will move up. I guess there was an RSC section somewhere, I thought, but I'll take care of those. And then in sensitivity and specificity, Sam added the specificity portion. I mean, I'll take his word for it. I'm not a microbiologist, so I think he'd be better at explaining these definitions and different things. Should we table this, Chris, for next time, or what do you think?
Maybe. I think it again goes to, I don't know. I don't know how in the weeds it is from a micro standpoint. So maybe we'll ask Sam to kind of revise it a little bit to make it more general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I really don't know. I mean, it could be general enough. I mean, it seems pretty general, but I really don't know. It'd be maybe a better question for Sam. So Andrew, you had a lot of comments, I think, so did Pam, on the LOD and MDL stuff. Do you just want to talk about those?
Yeah, and this might be a futile effort considering there's no consistent definitions across any agency or anything. But what I noticed here was that this specific requirement for limited detection really follows the DoD QSM, and it's almost it's not how it's presented in TNI. TNI almost has them equivalent as a DL, with MDL being a specific way that you can determine your DL. And so just for the water board's perspective, we're moving towards laboratories. Laboratories are moving towards TNI accreditation, or not TNI accreditation, ELAB accreditation through the TNI standard. And so want to be as consistent with that as possible and maybe not go above and beyond. I'm worried that if you have a lab report, an MDL and an LOD and an LOQ, that's not really how our programs are set up right now. And so that it may be confusing for many. That was my perspective.
I had the same heartache when I saw that this was the DoD criteria. And it gives me heartache anytime I see the DoD criteria. And I think from the California standpoint, we shouldn't be going there at all, because DoD is very specific to their type of monitoring and regulations, and they can set their own criteria, and they have chosen to ignore the EPA method. And not only that, they have a complicated procedure that doesn't mesh well with the new EPA procedure, and they're completely rewriting it. So in 6 months, the DoD procedure is going to change. So we should not be hanging our hat on that at this point. The DoD is, as Andrew, or the TNI, as Andrew said, it is different already. And, so we shouldn't, I don't think we should use the terms the DL, the LOD, LOQ. We should kind of stick with either MDL, LOD, which is LOD matches with TNI, and then the LOQ. And I started putting in some information on this. I think that some of these are my cut and paste that I was working on. But really, I think it just needs to go back to the TNI saying, one of the procedures that's available to you is the EPA procedures. If you happen to be doing a drinking water or a Clean Water Act, that's not a maybe you can use this. You must use that procedure then. If you're doing RCRA, you could possibly use it. You probably want to use it, but that's when you don't have to. And that's what DoD has done. So I think this one kind of needs a full rewrite and dropping out the DoD reference altogether.
Yeah, I agree. I think we could probably make this same thing that we talked about for those sections very general, and hear some examples and references, and leave it at that. What do you guys think? Would that be sufficient, I guess, for the document?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we want to do is we want to kind of touch on the difference between an LOD and an LOQ. Because like Andrew said, it's not standard in any way, shape, or form for any of the, even in California, not every agency uses the same thing. So having sort of the difference of what do these numbers mean, and kind of which ones are sort of similar to each other, right? Because even then, that's hard to figure out sometimes. And kind of keep it as this is, you have your lowest point, which is the kind of what you can tell from 0. And then you have your lowest point of, I know what this number means, right? And we want to keep it that general. Say this is what the lowest point is. Here's a bunch of ways to do it. This is the lowest number that I know what it means. Here's a bunch of ways to do it. I think we're going to definitely want to reference TNI because that's going to be a requirement for any ELAB accredited laboratories, which is kind of where all of these methods should be falling into. But then, like Pam said, drinking water ATPs, they have a very specific way of doing it. Use that way. So that kind of thing. So keep it general and give a bunch of examples and do our best to say these ones are kind of similar to one another. Which is always hard.
Yeah. Do we have any volunteers to do this section? Or we could table it for next time. I think we've got volunteers for a lot of things. Pam, is that a volunteering hand or?
I kind of a little of both. I finally found my hand, but yeah, I started working on this and then I kind of scrapped it last night because I figured it was, and I just wanted to, before I jumped into it on a major rewrite, I just kind of wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And yeah, I would reference TNI heavily and point to the existing documents, but yeah, I could work on that if you wanted me to.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
I got you down.
Cool. And we have a section on LOQs. I don't know if we can lump that in, or if we
Yeah,
should,
it would be the same because
yeah,
it's the basis of the definitions as they relate to each other. So yeah, I would do that whole section all the way down to the
Cool.
references.
yeah, that'd be great.
I think referencing the USCPA's LCMRL would also be good.
LCM and LMR.
I know, yeah,
What
too
does
many
that mean?
letters. Although it, oh gosh, I can't remember what it is, stands for. It's in the newer drinking
Yeah.
water methods. I think 524.4 has it.
Yeah, most of the new methods will have it. It's very cumbersome to run for sure, but yeah, it might be good to reference. It's called the LCMRL, and I also forgot the acronym.
Lowest concentration minimum reporting level.
That's what it is, yeah.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that technique, so maybe I can start with that and then somebody can add that. Anyone? I mean, I can rewrite this to what I know with the TNI.
Yeah, it's just another. It's kind of another LOQ. Is really what it is.
Yeah.
So we don't need to touch on that very much. We can just say this is
Okay.
another
It
one.
exists.
It exists. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I would go not further than that because I feel like it would be kind of overkill for a single lab validated method to do this for a very specific water board request or something. But yeah, it's worth mentioning probably. Carol, go ahead.
I think basically we just start pointing pointing fingers back at where they can find more information. And that
Yeah.
would be including for this LCMRL, because it would be specific to a project site or a regulatory body, their need. So we could say this, this is a general overview. Find out what is necessary for use of the method you're developing and incorporate it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And then let the end user or the requester and validator and all those folks decide. Yeah. Cool. And that kind of brings us to the end of the document. We have our few, definitions that we'll lump into full acronym definition table. Oh, sorry, I guess we have some other, my page names aren't updated. Sorry, we do have some more. Not to let you guys off the hook too early.
I was just gonna say I did calibration yesterday.
Yeah.
I know it's in there.
Yeah.
Although it's a weak attempt at calibration because it was one of those subjects where I went down like a rabbit hole trying to figure out how to frame this. I'm not sure if anyone had a chance to look at this, but I try to stay as high level as I could. And Judy mentioned it and she touched upon it in earlier. I don't know if we need to frame it this way, but I know in the industry, there's a general tendency there's a move away from the R value, the correlation coefficient. So I don't know if we need to stress that. But I also threw in kind of the TNI requirements a little bit, and then some of the number of calibration standards. But one of my considerations that I was thinking about was, quadratic regression, and then there's weighted quadratic, and there's all this other considerations. And I don't know if we even want to go that far. So that's how I'll leave it up for discussion. I thought that this probably needs some help, and I'd be happy to do more on this, but I wanted to get feedback first.
I mean, I read it and I appreciate the table taken straight from TNI, that is going to be a new requirement for laboratories. So I think this falls into the same kind of trap that we're trying to kind of stay consistent throughout the document. Actually, is like, here's ways to evaluate how good the calibration is. One is an R value. Maybe we'll put that one last. and say use RSE first, and then you can reference this section up above that says precision. See RSE, and then have alternative R value. Carol, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I kind of like the way you went, which was you grabbed the most common ones, which is either an average, a linear, or a quadratic. You know, some of those others are now appearing because of the, you know, continued advanced technology that the instruments are coming up with. Those for a regulator are going to be confusing as all get out. This is confusing enough, but these are the common ones that they'd be used to seeing in data, and so they'd have a better feeling. You could then just mention that there are other options that are not used as often, and put in a reference. If you want to, you know, more information on that, go here or something like that. But I like that you really kind of tried to keep it to standard practice type stuff, which makes it a lot easier. I spend a lot of my time explaining chemistry to regulators, and that's why I get really happy when I see people trying to be very low key or trying to pull the standard practices out rather than all the exceptions. It does make my life a little bit easier, and I appreciate that.
Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, so just a real quick note on this one. You know, I don't know that I agree with what you're saying, that it seems like, I mean, it's information that all of us who have ever calibrated an instrument, we all understand this. But to be able to put something very summarized in here saying these are ways to evaluate calibration curves, or this is criteria that you might use, and then do something more detailed later in the document. The idea of leaving the minimum number of calibration standards, I think that's important. Basic fundamentals, you know, could easily go here as a starting point for calibration curve evaluation. And I say that because when they changed the TNI standard, I'll go back to what I said earlier, they didn't add any criteria for RSE and RE, but it's kind of all fleshed itself out in the process. But I will say that the Environmental Monitoring Coalition, which is the group that was established when the Environmental Lab Advisory Board, the FACA for EPA, kind of went null and void a couple of years ago, the EMC is taking on an effort to push EPA to remove R value criteria from the methods. So yeah, I think it's important that we address R value, but I think it's really important that we address the RE and RSE, because, you know, I don't have a problem with R value if a person's actually looking at the calibration curve and can see where the points are to give that R value. But if you're just going strictly off of a 995, we've all seen that a bad calibration curve can give you a 995. But it's just a point that they are, you know, they are going to be making an effort to push away from it. So that's just a note.
Yeah, I think it's one of those pictures that I remember from college, is the four different graphs with different fits, and all of them are the same R value. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a good start. I do think it needs a little bit more detail on kind of what you would use to evaluate. You know, just kind of examples.
If you want to volunteer for that one, I'll take a stab at that one.
All right, I'll have Judy as the volunteer for that.
Oh, thank you. And, you know, there are also other, you know, types of calibrations. Some specific instruments can pull like a 3-point quadratic or cubic or a single point calibration. It's, yeah, a lot of potential for options there, as long as the quality is good. Yeah, thanks, Judy.
with that, Augustine, I went up. I didn't add anything about calibration verification checks. I left it there, but I assume we probably want to have some criteria or some indication that this is something that we would like to see in a validation package.
Yeah, I think we should. I don't know if Judy, you want to include language to that, but I feel like there's got to be something to make sure that the calibration still is valid or still is acceptable. But I think that could be just like a one sentence or a little mini paragraph at the end of this. Cool. See Judy and I are heads. Yeah. Thanks. And then this is the RSC section that, yeah, I think Chris, you're right. There's a lot of detail. We can just.
Yeah, once you have a formula in there, I think people are going to start to glaze over. And
Yeah. I mean, I might as well not even put it in there because no one's going to want to do that math. So
yeah,
we can just reference.
It's only us, only us here in the group that are like, "Ooh, math, cool."
Yeah. I was excited for this, but maybe not everybody else will. So yeah, we can just put a reference for that, and I'll do that when I edit that section. So yeah, these would be part of the calibration that Jude will work out. We had this section on inclusivity and exclusivity that I think was maybe kind of worked out in the specificity and selectivity. I don't know if we need to have anything else besides this, or besides that one section, if we need to have both, or what do you think?
Well, I'm going to give us a time check here before we jump into further. It's 2:52. We have the webcast available for a little bit further than the time slot that we have. If folks are okay going a little bit later today, I know we said 3, but if folks can stay later, that would be nice, that we can keep going. Is anyone opposed to staying? We'll cap it at 3:15. How does that sound?
It's good for me.
I do have to jump onto another meeting, unfortunately. So, but I'll jump off at 3.
I have to do the same too.
Okay. Then we'll quickly address next meeting.
Sure.
I am going to be out most of October and late October and early November. So I would like personally, just so I can attend the next one, to have the next meeting before the 15th of October. At any point before the 15th. So if anyone has any huge blocks of time that we should keep out for the beginning of October, or has a preference on what week of October you want to set it.
If your deadline is the 15th, then that week I'm gone that entire week. So I would be voting for the first week of October.
So that would be the week of the 4th through the 8th.
I second that because I have to be involved in a court hearing meeting, a court hearing that second week of October.
Yeah, that first week works for me as well. Friday, I'm out of town, but Monday through Thursday is cool.
Oh, I'll do a poll again. I think
Perfect.
that's making it a little bit more flexible for everyone. Not forcing ourselves to meet on Thursday or whatever we had set it to originally. It sounds like first week sounds good.
Yeah. Just for heads up, it gives us like less than 2 weeks likely for meeting our next assignments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta get to work.
So are you going to make the document available again? Or are you going to?
So I could make my edits and then send it out, or I could send it out right now and then make my edits and send you another one my edits are just going to be the order and the few things, the sections that I'm editing, which really shouldn't matter too much. So I could send you a digital version of this one, just like I did the last one, and then I'll put the sections together in the right order before the meeting, if that works.
Okay, sure.
Cool. Yeah, so as soon as this meeting's over, I will upload this guy to the cloud and send everybody their own link, just like I did for the previous one.
sounds good. And I'll get a copy of that. So if anyone on the webcast wants a copy, feel free to let me know, or well, me or email the comment inbox, and we'll get you an updated copy. Okay, that covers the last, I think, 2 items on our agenda. So that way we've marched through all of them, and we'll stay until 3:15 for the folks that can.
Cool. So yeah, the question was about inclusivity, exclusivity. I feel like it'd be covered with the selectivity and specificity sections. I would lump these kind of together, unless somebody thinks that we need to have 2 sections. Maybe a better question for Peter and Sam of anything specific.
Now, I think inclusivity and exclusivity basically are selectivity.
Yeah.
So I could see where that you could accomplish that pretty much the same. The only thing, specificity, I don't know if that gets caught up in it or not, but nevertheless, if we wanted to, we could bring all of it to here. And if we wanted to address, if specificity is different enough, we could talk about that here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need a separate section for those.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I'll combine those 2 then. And the last one that I don't know if we had anybody volunteer for this, but is the ruggedness. That it's, yeah, I think this one might need a little bit of work on. I don't know if we can solicit volunteers for this, or if you guys want to talk about it now, or what do you think?
I wrote it.
I mean, I like what Carol wrote. Maybe we'll take another look at it at a later point, just to make sure our whole document has one voice.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of happy with what it is right now. It's pretty general, and it gives some potential critical steps. So
Yeah, I mean, I would leave it. I don't think we need volunteer to edit or anything. I think it's pretty cool. We can get comments from our non-science folks, but I think it's cool.
I was basically saying I wrote it so someone else gets to edit it.
And we can probably get the last volunteers for the edits at the end once we get everything sorted out. We have a little bit on the checklist that I do think that we talked about this, like of less things we need to do for your flow chart and the checklist. Should we do these last steps now, assign somebody to the sections, or worry about that at the end? Chris, what do you think?
but does somebody want to try to take the checklist that we had and kind of clean it up and condense it to what we, I think we need to finish the text before we go back to checklist land.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Just because we want to make sure that our narrative matches what our technical list is going to be. So I think we'll hold off on the checklist.
Cool.
But somebody does need to volunteer for the holding time / stability, because Diane was originally going to write that, but cannot anymore.
I mean, I could take a stab at this and see what people think. It'll be, I mean, I think going with the theme of the rest of the document, it'll be very general and kind of vague, and you have to figure out what you need for your analytes and your method and everything.
All right, I'll put you down for first attempt then.
Cool.
You do have quite a lot on here, so.
Maybe I should. If somebody else wants to do the holding time, I will volunteer it back. But if not, I could take a stab.
And I believe the EPA has a document out there for this. So if you've seen that document, you could. I think there's some good information. If you haven't, I can probably find it.
Okay, if you don't mind, Judy, sending it my way, I could take that and paraphrase it a little bit and give a reference.
Yep, be glad
Cool.
to.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's the end. Also, I guess one question to ask, we have references. We have each section with references for that section that folks put in, and we have these that are kind of general references. Should we go through and actually cite the sections, or should it be at the end? This whole document was taken from these spots. Besides obviously the specific references for holding time or where we reference a specific module of TNI, you think it'd be sufficient just to have, other resources for folks?
I actually liked having all of the individual references when we were referencing them.
Okay.
I think that makes it a little easier, but I like having them in both places. So,
Sure.
Have a giant bibliography that's half the document here, because there are a lot of good resources out there. And if we list all of the ones that are available that we've used in any way, I think keeping that, even if we don't specifically reference them in a separate section, I think that keeping this is good.
Cool. Yeah, then what I could do is, it makes it a little bit tricky to automatically track the references, so we'll do it manually, but I'll put the references in each section as they're referenced, and at the end we'll put a big old table of resources for folks to which would just be essentially those references plus some other stuff.
Cool. That sounds good.
Cool. And then that's the whole thing.
Okay, I was checking for public comments. We don't have any comments from emails other than one that's requesting that we go back to the very beginning in our mission statement. And I think including some information on what it's not to be used for would also be beneficial. Because what it is pretty good. And I think what we need to include is what it is not. Right. It is not a step-by-step process. It's not fully comprehensive, but it does reference pieces there. So if anyone wants to take a stab at adding what mission statement or document purpose is not, I think that might be a good idea. We'll leave that one open. See, hearing no volunteers.
Sorry, I'll give that one a shot since I originally wrote it.
Okay.
So what it is not.
What it is not.
I kind of tried to address that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you, as we're going through this, I think we're going to have recommendations for like specific recoveries, like surrogate recoveries and things like that. And you should say this document is not intended to be the limit for any method in California. Right, that's determined by the agency itself.
That's what I kept trying to say. It's
Yeah.
guidelines, it's guidance. Okay, I'll put in specific wording that states this is not a document full of requirements and restrictions, or I'll find another way to phrase this, only allowable options. I'll
Right.
see what I can put together.
It's not a regulation. It's not, I think the EPA has like a disclaimer in front of a lot of their guidance stuff. That's kind of nice too.
Yeah, I'll go look and see if I can find some wording that I like and then try to put it in.
That's good. I think we've walked through everything. I'm going to do one last check for comments, and I don't think I have any. So, nope, no comments. So that's it for. That's it from my end. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? So we have gone over our time now. All right, I'll send out a poll for the October 4th through 8th that week to set up our next meeting.
Sounds good.
Sounds
All right.
real good.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.